I'm Jennifer Rooks, and this is Maine Calling, live today from Maine Public's future home in Portland, where we are joined by a wonderful audience. PBS Frontline is the program for investigative journalism and has been for 42 seasons. What goes into putting the program together? Our guest today knows better than anyone. Raney Aronson-Rath is executive producer and editor-in-chief of Frontline. Under her journalism and her leadership, Frontline has won every major award in broadcast journalism, some of them dozens of times. And she will talk to us today about her background, her work, and also about Frontline's collaboration with Maine Public and the Portland Press Herald on the project Breakdown in Maine. Raney, thank you so much for being here today.
It's wonderful to be here.
And of course, we invite you to join the conversation. You can send a brief email to talk@mainepublic.org. Post a comment on Facebook or Instagram, or give us a call at 1-800-399-3566. For those of you here in the audience, we welcome your questions as well. When the time comes, please raise your hand and we will bring you a microphone. Raney, I understand that you grew up without a television.
It's true. It's one of the fun facts of my life and my career is I actually grew up in Vermont, small rural town, and we had a radio. We didn't have a television. My parents really felt like radio was the best way to communicate and for us to learn the news. And so I actually grew up on Vermont Public Radio. That was really my biggest source of information. And I went to the small rural public schools, and that's where I grew up.
Wow, and you didn't even start your career as a documentary filmmaker. You did a lot of other things. First. So tell us about your earlier career, and now especially knowing that you didn't grow up watching documentary films, how did you come to the world of documentary filmmaking?
That's a great question. So I'll just say another shout out for rural public schools. I had the most incredible debate coach as a high schooler. And she really believed in this idea, and she was very fierce about it, that we really needed to be a group of young people who would consider what she would say at the time, both sides of a story. Now we know there's a multitude of sides to stories, right? More than two in some cases. And so she really taught us the discipline of thinking critically from different perspectives. And that's really what I embraced as a high schooler, became a debater, and that was really how I started to understand the country, because as a young debater, I got to travel the country, I was successful, and that really opened up my eyes to the type of journalism I wanted to practice. And so I thought as a college student and beyond that maybe the best way to create a healthy democracy through journalism, right? There's a multitude of ways to do that, was through this idea that you could, in a single program, like a Frontline film, have different ideas that live with each other, not fighting, but talking to each other. And that's really what's driven me since the very beginning. And I was a writer. I lived in Taiwan, in Taipei, right after college, and so that's where my career started. So a lot of us in the Frontline tradition, a lot of us were print reporters first, so we're journalists, we're reporters, we know how to actually write, which is very, if you watch Frontline, you can feel there's a written voice there. That's because a lot of us were writers first.
Okay, in your early career, before you became with Frontline, before you became executive producer, you produced several Frontline films.
It's true.
On topics as varied as religion, abortion, the plight of the news industry, sex workers in India, and I'm wondering what draws you to a topic personally? What is the topic that says, I have got to do that film?
I mean, first of all, I'm a very curious person. So back to the debate idea, I saw a lot of the country outside of Vermont as a young person, and I wanted to go back to those parts of the country. So one of my first conversations with David Fanning, the founder of Frontline, and just so you know, he is an incredible person, ran Frontline since the beginning, and I was his number 2 for about 8 or 9 years before I took over Frontline a decade ago. So the trajectory, the apprenticeship, the mentorship with him was really a serious one. And so back then when I was a filmmaker for him, I just said to him, I want to go and learn about what we were seeing. One of the most important vote blocks was the evangelical vote. So the film that I did that really looked at how George W. Bush was voted in at the time was really through some of the early makings of what we're seeing today. And so I spent a lot of time in Texas and really got underneath that story, and that was one of the first Frontlines I did. And when I was there, I started to see, there are all these stories in our country where people really do have different opinions, and how can we cultivate that conversation in a documentary? And that's what inspired most of my films, the film about abortion rights, the film, of course, about even issues related to our news industry and journalism, and the essence of what I care about, clearly the most. And so a lot of these films have those same curious questions, and now I run Frontline, so I get to inculcate that with our producers and encourage them to be curious and surprise us, right? So when you're watching a Frontline, you might think that you know the story, but I hope as you're watching, you start to learn something that you hadn't considered before, to challenge your own assumptions and thoughts.
That partially answers my next question, which is, Raney, and I know this is a hard question, what makes something a Frontline? When a producer is pitching you an idea, when is it a yes and when is it a no?
A great question, and I get asked that pretty much every time. So we don't really see ourselves in competition with other media per se. We're actually looking at where we can be additive. So we're looking at our society through the lens of what do we think needs more explication and explanation. And so we're taking on some of the most difficult subjects, not because the New York Times isn't or the Wall Street Journal. It's more like we think that Americans, and now we have a global audience too, really need to understand this. And that's really what we're looking at every time when we analyze. One of the most important parts of my job and my senior team's job is story selection, obviously, right? So every time we're thinking about, do we have something to add? Do we have actual original journalism at the heart of this? Could you just read it in the Boston Globe or the Portland Press Herald? Well, that's good too, right? But what do we bring to the table?
I suspect most people don't have any idea what goes into a Frontline episode. Give us a sense of the process. How long from that original idea, that pitch, to broadcast? What is involved in the reporting process? I have an idea of what goes into it, but I suspect most people don't. And I want you to sort of, it's really quite something. So if you could explain it.
I'll first say that Frontline has anywhere from 20 to 24 documentaries a year. So that's how many stories we're selecting to tell. So if you just think about a newspaper, right? A newspaper has multiple stories a day. And then they have that like A1, if you're still thinking about the hard copy of a newspaper, they have that A1 story. So we are thinking like that A1, right? Like, what is the biggest story? We're never doing, I wish we could, but we're never really doing like the back of the book. We're never able to do smaller stories because we really only have 20 to 24 stories a year. We have film teams that work really in conjunction with our senior editorial team and our reporters who are internal to Frontline. And usually it takes about 8 months. That's kind of the rule. We like to give people time, and I'm going to tell you why we don't rush. I think something that I learned as a filmmaker for Frontline was, it's not like we're slow, but we definitely, because I came out of network television where you were just rushing stories on the air and you didn't have the consideration of time, and that wasn't your advantage. It was almost like your disadvantage. It was like the quicker you could go, the more you would be lauded by your bosses, especially as a young producer. When I came into Frontline, I learned that the secret sauce is in the time that we take to tell the stories that we tell. And the reason is because we think something at the beginning of a reporting process that through those number of months really changes because it becomes more nuanced. We get access to different opinions. We have investigative reporters who uncover additional work. And so we like to take time. There are times, however, that I do rush, and that's when I think there's a public imperative for people to know the information we have. A great example is we had this very important information out of West Africa about the Ebola crisis and the very first iteration of the Ebola crisis. We had really exclusive footage that was showing us what was happening there, and we decided, okay, we're not going to be precious about this one. We're going to get this on the air soon. So a lot of times we're making those types of decisions. Our teams are, for the most part, pretty veteran. They've done multiple films, but increasingly we're working with new people we mentor them. It's really one of my biggest joys is bringing new people into Frontline and teaching them the tradition of Frontline, and frankly learning from them. Like, we learn so much from younger generations who teach us different storytelling techniques and different ideas that they bring to the table. So we're like what we call a multi-generational producing show. We have people who are 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and even in early 80s who work for Frontline. And that's really my goal, is to make sure that all generations and all people are represented in our work.
You've been behind several new initiatives at Frontline, and the one that people here will be familiar with is the local journalism
Yes.
project, because Breakdown in Maine was a part of that. That was the big project with the Maine Public and Portland Press Herald. I hope that you all have seen this film, and the podcast and the articles in the Press Herald. And I'm wondering if you could just back up, what was the thinking behind launching a local journalism project, and how are the individual projects selected?
Well, first of all, I'm so happy to be in Maine. It's really a joy. But the inspiration came out of a year that I spent on the Night Media Forum, and basically I spent a year on a commission that looked at media and trust. And because I'm a national level producer, what I noticed as I was on that commission in the communities that we traveled to was that really trust in journalism begins at the local level. I mean, this is an obvious thing to say now, but this is 8 or 9 years ago. We were starting to see the lack of trust in journalists and journalism. And so as I learned this, I thought to myself, you know, Frontline, we're not going to be the solution, but we should be part of the solution. And instead of being a national producer that sort of comes into Lewiston, Maine, does a film and leaves, what if we were to actually turn this on its head and fund and support the journalism that happens at the local level to sustain local journalism too, and then that work that would go on to Frontline, I figured would be stronger. And so that was the impetus for the funding that we got, actually from the Knight Foundation and a couple of really incredible individuals who helped us, to say that we fund 5 newsrooms in the country. We're really proud of the work that the local journalism initiative oversees, but we're also really so thrilled with how then that journalism makes Frontline stronger. And so that's what I thought could be a good idea, and it turned out it was. And here I am in Maine talking to you all about Breakdown, which is one of the most important films on Frontline last year.
And I wanted to ask you about choosing that one. What made the Lewiston shooting investigation such an important story to tell? I mean, it sounds terrible to say, but it isn't the only mass shooting in America. Why this one?
Right, so we have done a lot about the gun control debate, but actually, I'll just be honest, I was pitched this as a documentary by a film producer named James Blue. He walked through my door and he showed me some footage, and sometimes that is how Frontline starts, right? A Frontline. And what he showed me was the experience that some people in the deaf and hard of hearing community had in Lewiston, Maine, as they were learning and experiencing the shooting. And so he showed me this footage of them just sharing their story. And I thought, you know, that's something I haven't really seen before. And the first person telling of what that would be like with emergency workers not being able, or not being trained in ASL, not knowing how to communicate, and how that must have felt, I thought, could be a very interesting part of the film to explore that we hadn't done at Frontline before. So it started as a Frontline, and then we realized pretty quickly that Maine Public and the Portland Press Herald were the ones doing the best journalism on that story. And so then it became us coming to Maine Public and the Portland Press Herald with James, and James came with this idea too. How do we work with local journalists? So this isn't really our idea, it was really his, that we should all work together, and that's how it started. And so Frontlines start in different ways. Sometimes it starts with me seeing something that I think is extraordinary that happened with Forsama, one of our Oscar-nominated films. It happened with 20 Days in Mariupol, which did win an Oscar, where I saw this footage first and foremost, and I thought, well, this actually could be a documentary that people would have a hard time forgetting.
Frontline tackles hard and important topics, and this is sort of a big question, but do you worry that in today's world, the audience has a saturation point, whether it's compassion fatigue or chaos fatigue? Do you worry that people just can't do it, can't watch anymore?
Well, no. So I'll tell you what I do worry about. I mean, I want more people always to, but I think it's really an essential time for journalism to tell thoughtful stories. I really think that this is the time for us to shine. I have a very optimistic point of view on this, and I see it in our audience that, our streaming audience, or people who watch us online, is larger and more robust than ever. The broadcast is strong. We have a hunger in America and globally right now for facts and vetted journalism, and so I actually have the opposite concern. I want more people to do journalism like Frontline and Maine Public does. I want more of this type of vetted journalism because my concern is that we're really swimming in a sea of dis and misinformation. And so I want more of this type of journalism. I don't want to be, the only big investigative documentary program. I want others to join in, and I think that we have seen, and I really appreciate it, that people come to us and say, thank you, we didn't understand this, we need to understand this, can you do more? Mostly that's what I hear, could you do more Frontline? And it's like, all right, well, we're gonna try, but
20 to 24 is
a lot. Thank you.
We are speaking with Raney Aronson-Rath, the executive producer of Frontline. Our phone number, 1-800-399-3566. We'll be right back.
Celebrating 50 years of educational travel adventures in over 100 countries. Learn more at roadscholar.org/learning. And by Hamden Farmers Market, with bi-weekly markets all winter. Committed to supporting the local farmers and artisans who nourish Maine families. HamdenFarmersMarket.com.
Hey, how are you?
Sometimes it's not enough to just honor our history. We've got to break it up when we make it. On the next Selected Shorts, Black writers and activists, including James Baldwin and me, and guest host,
Yes,
Ray McKesson,
I will.
revisit and remix the American story.
From American Public Media.
That's embarrassing.
This afternoon at 2 o'clock on Maine Public Radio. The Maine Public Book Club is back for 2025 with our insightful and entertaining host, Bill Nemitz. We'll kick this year off with Waiting for the Long Night Moon by Amanda Peters, with a virtual book club meeting on Thursday evening, March 27th. For a preview of our upcoming selections and to sign up, visit mainpublic.org and click on Community.
Welcome back. I'm Jennifer Rooks, and this is Maine Calling. Today we are hosting Maine Calling from Maine Public's future home in Portland, and we have a great audience joining us. I'm talking with Raney Aronson-Rath. She is the executive producer and editor-in-chief of Frontline on PBS. That, of course, is the acclaimed documentary program known for investigative journalism. 42 seasons in, more than 800 episodes, just unbelievable, given especially how bleak the world of journalism is in some parts of the country. You can share your comments and questions for Raney. You can send a brief email to talk@mainpublic.org. As always, comment on Facebook or Instagram, or call 1-800-399-3566. Or if you're right here in the audience, please raise your hand and we will get you a microphone. So while we have a moment, and I hope you all will raise your hand. I don't see anybody raising their hand yet. I'll ask Raney a couple more questions. You mentioned streaming, and I noticed that Frontline's YouTube audience has more than 3 million subscribers. And I'm wondering, one, if that's a surprise to you, and two, how that changes the mission of Frontline.
I love that question. Thank you for asking. So just so you all know, if you didn't see Breakdown in Maine, you can stream it on our website, pbs.org/frontline, the PBS app, which is very important that we all use the PBS app, and also on YouTube. So if you have anyone in your life who watches YouTube, you'll know that you can basically really get a lot of stuff on YouTube that you shouldn't be watching. So we figured, this is 6 or 7 years ago, because by the way, I have an 18-year-old boy, so he's sort of my secret weapon. He started to show me the YouTube environment, and I started to see what was there. But I also saw something very interesting on YouTube, which is the community is very engaged, right? So some of us in the journalism side of things were thinking, well, maybe we could put some of our content there. So we started on YouTube with short form content. Then 2016 rolled around, and I asked PBS, because we're exclusive to PBS, could we try a pilot and put the choice, which I'm sure you're all aware, we do the choice every 4 years of the presidential candidates, on YouTube, and we did. 2016, that film just blew up on YouTube. It was so surprising, to your point, yes, that people also watched for an average on that film of 42 minutes. The reason why I remember that is because that was sort of the impetus to say to PBS, this is a younger audience, right? So it's not going to take anything away from our broadcast audience. Would it be okay if we started to share more of our serious work on YouTube? And they said yes. And now we have 3 million subscribers almost. But as important as the subscribers is, the documentaries that we share there, sometimes they have 10 to 20 million views. And those people are watching on average for anywhere from like 28 to 31 minutes. That's really, so they're not just sort of coming in for a minute and coming off. So this is actually part of our theory is people are hungry for this type of journalism, trustworthy journalism, and this is one of the environments that they can find us, and it's just been really encouraging. The comments are huge. That's the other thing is sometimes our films, and I'm not exaggerating, can have anywhere from like 6,000 to 8,000 comments. So it's really an engaged community. It's not the community that you might imagine. It's actually quite a respectful community as far as we can tell. We monitor it. I mean, there is some stuff there that we have to monitor and make sure doesn't happen, but for the most part, it's a respectful community of people. And they're asking us for more Frontline. I would say that's the most vocal community, including the public media supporters like yourselves that really ask us for more.
We'll go to a caller. We'll go to Linda, who is calling from Yarmouth. Hi, Linda. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Please inform the public through Frontline or through your radio stations that there has been fighting fraud going all the way back to the Obama administration. I went to the government documents and I found that the Justice Department recovered nearly $6 billion in the False Claims Act and whistleblowers. In 2020, the Justice Department found $2.2 billion, and in 2021, 5.6 billion was found. And as I go through, they provide the evidence where the fraud was, mostly corporations, kickbacks from hospitals trying to force people to get on Obamacare. It wasn't our bureaucrats or our government workers that were making money off of different agencies. So fraud and misuse of funds, there has always been an oversight committee. They have always brought it out. What this administration is doing is using fraud as an umbrella to dismantle these agencies so they cannot be checked.
Linda, thank you for your call. Raney, a show idea from an audience member.
Well, we do love to get ideas from our audience members. Send us so many great ideas. We will be reporting on all issues related to obviously what's happening now. We did it with Biden. We did it before that. So yeah, thank you for that comment.
Great, Linda, thank you for your call. Do we have any questions from the audience? Yes, right over here, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Doug from South Portland, and you mentioned that you wanted to see all journalism operate, we'll say, at the professional level of what we have here, and I'm wondering, how do you see us getting to that point when so much money pours into lesser journalism?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I think one of the things that you are seeing nationally right now is an appreciation for journalism. Look back to the Knight Foundation, and when I spent time in the country, you did feel like people like yourselves like really do care about that, and so support for your local stations is probably the most important thing. And then beyond that, local news organizations like the Portland Press Herald, you know, supporting, subscribing, that's really what I talk a lot about as I talk to people in the country. Support local journalism, because that in turn helps shows like Frontline and others really do our jobs. I mean, journalism costs money, right? So the work that we do, if we're spending 8 months on a film to really think deeply about something so that you all can watch it and other people in the community can watch it, that's where really we encourage people to help us out, because I think that's really what we're all about, is how can we do more vetted factual journalism, and then of course that does cost money. To the second part of what you said, I do think that right now the landscape on social media and others is really encouraging mis and disinformation. There's an MIT study that shows that lies actually travel 6 times faster than truth in these environments, right? And so that is our guiding light. How can we be on social media too with facts, right? How can we be in these spaces with our work, and hopefully we can hold the tide and we can really help people understand what's truly happening. And the vetted part of what we do is probably the most serious. And again, to the secret sauce of what we do, that editorial process is sacrosanct, and you see that throughout public broadcasting and public media.
Any more questions from the audience? Yes, right here. And thank you for standing and saying your first name and what town you're from.
Hi there, I'm Michael from Hollis, and I'm wondering if you can address some of the concerns about public broadcasting being defunded by the current administration.
Thank you for that. I mean, these conversations have gone on since the beginning, I would say, of public broadcasting and PBS and NPR. However, you know, we're all reading what you're reading, and we're all very focused on something at Frontline, which is doing our jobs and doing our work with the hope and the expectation that our work will be appreciated into the future. And so that's really our guiding light right now. Fortunately, we have great leadership, and so we're really in it right now, but I honestly believe that local work, local stations, places like Maine Public, and obviously Frontline, we're gonna just keep doing our jobs and keep our eyes steady doing our work.
Raney, it occurs to me that your job must be, you're here with a smile on your face and you don't seem completely stressed out, but it must be very stressful. And I'm wondering if you could talk about the pressure of working in investigative journalism and the pressure to get it right, and not just the pressure to get it right, but to be Frontline. That this Frontline episode is going to be the Frontline episode.
Well, first of all, my father is a doctor. He's actually taught me a lot as a kid, and I would say the same thing to him, like, wow, you're dealing with life or death situations. Like, how do you keep yourself so optimistic and happy? And he's like, well, Raney, I'm doing my life's work. This is what I was meant to do. I'm a doctor. I'm taking care of people. And I thought, like, as a child, hearing that over and over again from him was so helpful when I really found journalism as my calling. So you would be surprised, I don't feel stressed, I feel focused. This is true this year, it was true last year, it was true during COVID. I mean, really, truly, I took Frontline over 10 years ago. So I really have felt through this decade, we have all faced so many challenges. So at least I can do something. We can tell stories about it. We can tell stories that matter. So for me, that's what is my guiding light and my team's guiding light. That's how I lead my team. So we support each other. We're not stressed. We're like very, very, very focused right now. And that's why I love coming to local communities, because, well, frankly, I love seeing people here who appreciate our work, who ask hard questions and good questions. That's what we want, you know, and that will sustain me into next week when we're working on a next documentary.
All right, well, I understand we have a question from the audience, from Rick.
Rick?
Rick from Portland. Raney, we're coming up on Oscars in a month, and a year ago, I believe, you were on the Oscar stage. You
It
talked
was a
about
wonderful moment.
20 days in Mariupol.
Sure, thank you for bringing that up. So Frontline, as you know, we're a television show, but in the last number of years, I've also taken a few of our documentaries with a different route in mind, which is we go into theaters and we go into festivals, and we were nominated for 2 documentaries before this, and then 20 Days in Mariupol came along. 20 Days in Mariupol is a collaboration with the Associated Press. It was really remarkable footage that was captured by a film team led by Mstislav Shernov in Mariupol at the beginning of the Russia incursion on Ukraine. And what we saw in that early footage was, first of all, they were the only journalists there, was nothing short of extraordinary, and I got to see all of it. And we decided to make a documentary together. And then we did decide to well, we were accepted at Sundance, and it premiered at Sundance, and then we spent a number of months bringing the film into the community. We actually were in 280 local communities with that film across America, not just the coast, but we went into America with that film. The conversations we had around it were extraordinary, and then we were fortunate to be nominated, and then we were fortunate to win. I will say that that moment with Mstislav Chernov, who is the director, was a very emotional one. It was the first time a Ukrainian director won an Oscar, so the gravity of standing on stage next to him was really quite something, you know, to think about that, like your country's first Oscar. That was really, really great. And then obviously really raised awareness about the Ukrainian issue. To the streaming question, you know, because of that type of attention for 20 Days in Mariupol, millions of more people decided to watch it in the months leading up to the Oscar and after. So that was the biggest win, was that more people came into our community to watch our documentary.
I'm really struck by something Mstislav Chernov said in the trailer for the film. He wrote, or he said, "The brain will desperately want to forget. The camera won't let that happen." And I thought to myself, that is the power of documentary film, isn't it? That it's really easy. Our brains are programmed to forget things that are difficult.
Right, I really do think of Frontline as being a record. I think we need a record right now of what's happening. I've always felt that way. And I felt with Mariupol, right, these are the only journalists on the ground. I'll tell you that Russia decided to create a propaganda film also out of Mariupol. And they created a version of events that was their version of events. And they shared that documentary too with their communities and locally, so that people have a different version of what happened in Mariupol and Russia. And so I felt that it was imperative that we tell true stories, factual stories, and that we have a record that you can't forget. And it's something that you can't unsee. And so it's difficult. That's Mstislav's point, right? It's very hard to watch Frontline sometimes, but it's also really important.
We're going to go to Bob, who's calling from Saco. Hi, Bob. Go ahead.
Good morning, and first of all, I'd like to thank you for your life's work. I think it's very important. But there's a new phenomenon out there where people tend to believe what they want to believe and not necessarily believe the truth. And I think that was evident when Tucker Carlson got fired. People were more upset with Fox for a news channel for firing him than they were being upset that he was lying to them. And I was wondering, does that affect the way you present any of your stories? Or have you considered that new phenomenon, and how do you deal with it? And I'm going to hang up and listen to your response. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, definitely we think about this every day, that we're publishing into an environment on all of these different platforms where, you know, dis and misinformation is there alongside or adjacent to our work. I will say that I still believe that vetted factual journalism and the numbers that we see Frontline being seen and the work that we see being listened to locally, I think that we will still be able to hold the line on fair and vetted journalism. I also think it's really important for all of us who are in social media landscapes to be looking at what you're looking at. So something that you're watching on Instagram or on Facebook can be very persuasive, and this is what I talk to my teenagers about almost on a daily basis. I'm looking at their media because I'm concerned. Younger people are having what we would say is the first unmitigated experience with media. If you think about my experience growing up, we were listening to the radio together as a family, where we were talking about this one entity, which was VPR, vetted journalism, and that's how we talked about the world, right? So now our kids, my teenagers, are getting all of this stuff in their lives, which a lot of which is good and a lot of which isn't good. And so that's what I focus on a lot, is how can we all take responsibility. The other thing Frontline does is we report on the platforms. So we've done a big film about Facebook. We're about to do a big film on Telegram, because whether you know it or not, that's one of the biggest environments for mis and disinformation. And so we're looking at these platforms too and doing accountability journalism about how disinformation spreads and how that can then have people believe something that isn't true. Really thoughtful, smart people in your lives probably believe some of this too. And that's the kind of conversations that we're having all the time.
We're going to take another quick break. What are your questions about Frontline? Our guest today, Raney Aronson-Rath, the executive producer of this legacy program. Our phone number, 1-800-399-3566. And if you're here in the room, we'd like you to raise your hand and ask a question. We'll be right back.
You may be 160 Front Street in downtown Bath, offering full-service interior design, decorative hardware, and select home accents. And by Girl Scouts of Maine, committed to offering experiences for girls to find their voice and become confident leaders. Learn more at girlscoutsofmaine.org.
Scott Tong. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi comes to Washington to meet with President Trump at the White House. Each country calls the other a strong partner, though Trump plans to press Modi for trade concessions. We'll discuss where the relationship is now, next time on Here and Now.
Here and Now from noon to 2, right here on Maine Public Radio. You know you can trust Maine Public Television with your children because our PBS Kids programming is educational, safe, and non-commercial.
Yeah, that's
you
right.
can find kids programming on our main channel mornings and early afternoons. And it's also available 24/7 on our special PBS Kids channel. PBS Kids is available free over the air on most cable systems throughout Maine and at your fingertips through the PBS Kids app. To learn more about PBS Kids, please visit mainepublic.org.
Welcome back. I'm Jennifer Rooks. You're listening to Maine Calling. My guest today, PBS's award-winning Frontline executive producer, Raney Aronson-Rath. If you have a question, give us a call, 1-800-399-3566. Find us on social media, or if you're here in the audience, raise your hand. Before we go back to audience questions, though, I want to tell you what Raney and I were talking about during the break. Yesterday, the guest on Maine Calling was Maria Ressa, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, and much of what you're talking about right now, Raney, reminds me of what Maria said yesterday about the power of social media to spread lies and misinformation. Yesterday, when we told Maria you would be on the show today, she said, please give Raney a hug. You did a Frontline with her that was very powerful the same year she won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Right, so I've known Maria. Actually, we had Maria in our Facebook film, which is years and years ago. We interviewed her from the Philippines, well before she was well known. And she was the first person who taught me how there could be real life harm based on what was happening on Facebook. This seems obvious now, but many, many years ago, I watched her interview and it was like a light bulb I can't explain. So Maria and I became very close, and we ended up making a film about her called 1,000 Cuts. So 1,000 Cuts, the idea of it, which is streaming on our website and on YouTube, is this idea of little cuts. And in this case, it was President Duterte, who was just cutting away at truth, right? Little by little by little, so much so that many Filipinos just didn't even know it was true anymore. And Maria, who is just a stalwart truth teller, runs Rappler, which is a news organization there. And she is one of the most inspiring people that I know. We became friends, and she's a source of inspiration for me and so many news leaders like me. We talk to Maria when we are despairing privately, and she helps us understand that journalism matters, and she's just incredible.
We'll go to the front row here in the room. Go ahead, say your first name and what town you're from.
Yeah, hi everyone, my name is Forrest, and I am from Wyndham, Maine. First, I just want to thank you so much for the Frontline and you two for doing the Maine Public talk. The breakdown in Maine is what I wanted to mention. Yes. You know, how, we heard about this from all these different news broadcasts going on, but till the Frontline show came out, breakdown in Maine, we didn't really get the whole information, And one thing, it must be extremely hard to pull information from people who don't want to tell you anything.
Right. True.
But it just opened my eyes to really, the laws that we have in the state, you know, the red flag law for one, and how obvious it was that there was an issue going on, and everybody just wanted to look at someone else, you know, and fill the blame when it should have been an easy solution if we had the right laws. So I'm just curious about what you think about the laws and, you know, and whether it's something that, you know, no matter what political affiliation you're from, do you see this issue with this?
Right, it's a great question. I was going to say that one of Frontline's method is to look at a story like Breakdown and understand actually like where were the breakdowns. So the breakdowns in this story were a multitude, right? And if we looked at even Robert Card and his life, right, and looked at some of those breakdowns along the way, including the laws, right, and questions around the laws, that's what we were trying to do. So you're kind of pinning the tail on the donkey almost. You're going piece by piece to try to understand where is the breakdown. Now, in terms of the laws here, that is up to policymakers and you all to discuss. And that's what we're trying to prompt. We're trying to prompt you all to know, as you do, right? You'll know it in the news, but to think deeply about what kind of community you all want, right? It's gonna be different everywhere. We found this in Uvalde, Texas. I was so surprised when we did that film about how many people in the community, even people who had children who were victims, are really passionate gun owners. They really felt strongly about their rights, right? Even in light of what happened. And so I think there's not going to be one opinion, but I would just really encourage discussion and thoughtfulness about this for all of us.
We'll go to Jamie calling from Portland. Hi, Jamie, go ahead.
Oh, hi, thank you for taking my call. And thank you for the important work Frontline does. Is there a pathway to do a shortened version? And this is meeting people where they are online and the younger demographic maybe that is looking for shorter bits of information. And is there a pathway to take past episodes, current ones, and to do an abstract type presentation? And you get a number in your head, 5 to 10 minutes, you know, maybe, and you could say, well, PBS NewsHour is doing that in a sense, not with the depth that the Frontline profile is given to a topic, and not with some of the players that or the people being interviewed are presenting. So, and I'm not talking about a partial summation. I'm saying something that could get in 8 minutes.
Thank you, Jamie. And is that, I'll ask Raney that, is that something you've considered, doing a shorter version of your Frontline?
Well, it's a great question for today because we have been working on a short form series for Frontline, because what our caller just said so cogently is that we really do need to do very short for our younger audiences for the most part, right? We see on YouTube people do watch long form. Those people generally are still 30s and up, right? So we're looking at the audience that we're not currently reaching en masse is the 18 to 24. If you look at how people voted this time around, right? It's important to reach young people where they are with the media that they will watch. It still has to be vetted. It still has to be fair, right? But short is the key, and we are launching a new show. We're launching in 2 weeks, so great timing. And you'll start to see it on YouTube, on Instagram, on Snapchat, and we'll see where other platforms go. But this is gonna hopefully meet the audience with content I hope that they will appreciate. And the title of it is For the Record. And so we're hoping that it's for the record from Frontline, that people will appreciate this and start to share this. We have a lot of teenagers and young people working with us on this project. They're not in charge of the content, but they're certainly weighing in on how we tell stories. And it's been such a, like I was saying earlier, such a great learning for all of us at Frontline as well.
We'll go to Mary calling from Portland. Hi, Mary, go ahead. Mary, can you hear us? Are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I simply want to thank you for this particular program today. I have often listened to Maine Calling and find it very informative. However, focus today on Frontline, which I have not often seen and will now encourage me to watch it frequently. I want to thank you for helping us as people in the United States and in Maine to bring the truth in the news. I have often watched at PBS NewsHour, and there's another program, and I forget the woman who is the moderator of it, Margaret Hooper or Hoover. And I can't remember the name of the program even, but I found her interviewing with a variety of people and very informative and helpful. I just want to applaud the efforts to bring us the truth at this time in our country and in our state. So thank you to Jennifer and to you at Frontline and those at PBS striving to bring us the facts and not in a sensational way, but simply seeking the truth.
Thank you,
And
thank you, Mary, thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
I appreciate that very much. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Oh yes, right back here, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Paul, I'm from Standish, and thanks again for coming up. And with the hours of footage that you have, for an episode, how do you arrive at the sweet spot to come up with 50 minutes or 1 hour, I don't know, the exact window that you have to work in? How do you arrive at that?
Well, that takes a lot of practice. I talked about my apprenticeship with David Fanning, who founded Frontline, and making films for Frontline, I think, was probably the best thing that I ever did for my career, was to actually learn how to make a Frontline documentary in the edit room. So a lot of times we're going out, we have an idea of a story, but the actual making of a Frontline happens in our edit rooms. And we actually hang a plumb line in most of our edit rooms. So the idea being that we have a line through a film. You understand what the story is going to be at the beginning, and if you feel grounded throughout, you'll be able to narratively understand it. So we are storytellers too, so we're really trying to tell you a story, but then you're learning along the way all of the nuance and all of the complexity. So anytime that we're off a line and we're sort of in a sort of paragraph that you're like, oh, that doesn't belong in an article, we have to take out of the film. And that process is the favorite part of my job. I grew up in an edit room. I love being in an edit room. I love this too, by the way. But I really love and cherish that time with our filmmakers to think through what's the most important way to tell this story, the most cogent way to tell it. And I learn a lot from our filmmakers along the way too. Surprises happen in the edit room pretty much hourly. But you're right, it's a lot of footage. Sometimes we'll have 100 hours, if you can imagine, right? So like any good editor, you have to sit there and figure out what the best story is to tell. Thanks for your question.
Yes, we have another question.
Hi, I'm Caroline from Winthrop, and I was just wondering if you have any advice for journalism, media studies, or communication students who are eager to participate in excellent journalism like the journalism Frontline produces, specifically networking advice, because with rural students, we sometimes find it hard to find opportunities.
Right, I was a rural student too, so I can relate. I think the most important thing, and this is what I really did as a young person, is to figure out what resonates with me. I know that feels self-serving, but when you're talking to somebody like me, if you've studied us and you truly love Frontline, you understand us, you've watched us, that is like your first foot in the door, is knowledge about what somebody's making or writing. So if you're a writer and you just simply love the way that the Portland Press Herald covers a story, just doing your homework is the most important thing for networking success. I say this to my 18-year-old too. Don't just say you want to do X, like actually learn about it, think about it, and then really do your homework so that the person who does that work, when you're talking to them, feels respected, like, oh, you've actually done that. And that's when we, hire people and get an internship. That's the other thing is, when I was young, I had a job, but I was not independently wealthy at all, so I had to work. And so I would actually have a job and then I would work on my own documentary overnight. I mean, it was actually kind of not healthy, so I'm not suggesting that. I'm really not. But I do think there's something in just, if you really love this, start doing it, start really doing your homework, and then get an internship, or, you know, there's a lot of internships still, so.
Go ahead, we've got another question from the audience.
Hi, I'm Mike Casey. I'm down here from Falmouth High School with some of my students. Quick question. I teach journalism and media studies, and question about story selection. We do a lot of work with long form and feature stories, and I talk a lot to the kids about how, you know, long form is sort of a big story wrapped around a more specific story, sort of a through line. And my question was, how, when you're choosing stories or deciding, you know, do you go sort of, you know, deductively? Do you pick a big national issue and then find a specific place where it's happening? Or do you, like, you know, find a specific instance and look at the big issue from there? Or how do you go about story selection that way?
Yeah, so it happens a multitude of different ways. Usually we're looking at what can we tell as an original story first and foremost. So we get pitched on great stories all the time, and I just decide they're not for Frontline. I'm like, HBO could do that, right? It's a good story. But like, we're looking at something that's really like earnest, which is what are we adding into the conversation, into our society, that somebody watching us will have a light bulb moment like I did with Maria Reza on Facebook, where you truly understand, oh, the real life harm of Facebook in that case, right? And then in terms of story selection overall, we are a current affairs series, so we see ourselves as reporting on what's happening today, but we always take a longitudinal look at why this is happening today. So that's one of my favorite things to do is, if we see a story happening right now, I want to know why. But one of the greatest questions we're asking right now is how the parties have shifted and changed over the last 40 years. We actually think there's a story.
Gonna have to be your last comment. I hate cutting off Raney Aronson-Rath, executive producer of Frontline. Thank you to all who came today. Thank you to Jane Donahue, our sound engineer, Brenna Farrell, Dan Works, John Bradford, Sid Bradford, our ASL interpreter, and our producers, Jonathan Smith and Cindy Hahn. This is Maine Public Radio.